Is Emile Smith Rowe the most important player in the Premier League this season? Well, his absence from Arsenal might be the biggest factor in what is going to come down to a massively tight Premier League race. We're going to talk about how that one move may have changed the outcome of the entire Premier League season. Next, here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub. So what was your response when Emile Smith Rowe transferred from Arsenal to Fulham this summer? I think most people's were sort of like, oh, okay, that's nice. Fulham, good move. I like what you're doing here. Emile Smith Rowe, sort of forgot about him, but still young, nice player. It'll be nice to see what he can do. If you weren't an Arsenal supporter or you weren't a Fulham supporter, it probably was sort of like, okay, cool. There's some news in the summer, and we have some downtime, and yeah, okay, nice job, Fulham. Cool. It wasn't a big seismic move. It wasn't this massive event. It was like, hey, it'll be nice to see him get a run of games. And he has helped Fulham overachieve from what most people probably thought they would do. And he has played a big role in that. But Smith Rowe's absence from Arsenal got magnified when Martin Odegaard went down in mid-September and missed 7 games. And that could end up making the difference in what is becoming a ridiculously tight Premier League race. So we're going to get into that and that impact here in a second. But before we do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel. Get down in that comment section. What impact do you think Smith Rowe would have had if he was still in Arsenal? How much difference would it have made? Get in that comment section. Let me know what you think. You can also leave comments on Twitter at PitchsidePub and check out the website pitchsidepub.com. So Martin Odegaard missed 7 games. During that time, Arsenal dropped 8 points. They are 9 points behind Liverpool in the Premier League table. It's not quite that simple, but sometimes things really do add up and make you go, well, we see where the difference would be. Now, Emile Smith Rowe's presence back at Arsenal would not have stopped the 3 red cards, which are also playing a massive role here. So there are obviously other variables at play, and it's not nearly this simple. However, Martin Odegaard's absence is so telling in the style of play that Arsenal has played since he has been gone. They have gone from, they were never a massively front foot kind of team. They were always more possession based. But since he has been gone, their offensive attack has gone virtually dormant, and they have turned into this very, back foot, sitting back, non-aggressive type team, at least on offense. And of course, again, being down a man in 3 of your 11 games obviously plays a massive role in that. So the stats are very skewed when you look at where Arsenal stacks up as a whole. But Mikel Arteta has shown that he is not a super aggressive offensive coach, and he's settling in to be a lot more Jose Mourinho than he is Pep Guardiola, which is fine. But it means that they don't have a lot of offensive output. So when you lose someone like Martin Odegaard, it really leaves a hole in things. And the stat that I'm going to use, I'm stealing from James Alcott's podcast, The Ripple Effect, where they went through all these different stats, the most telling stats of the season. And the one they pointed out was the lack of passes into the final third for Arsenal, where they sit 14th at present. And that is not good. And a large part of why that is the absence of Martin Odegaard. And if you still had Emile Smith Rowe, that would have been an easy way to slot him in. You could have slotted him in right into Odegaard's spot in that as that sort of number 10 or the more forward of the 2 central midfielders, and they wouldn't have missed a beat. In fact, Emile Smith Rowe actually is better, slightly, statistically, at creating passes into the final third. And if we look at this passes into the final third, it's really telling as to what was missing while Odegaard was out. In his limited time, he's played 343 Premier League minutes at the moment. He has 17 passes into the final third. That's 4.46 passes into the final third per 90. 4.46 isn't a wildly great number, but it is tops on the Arsenal team, which means that most of the offense runs through him. They don't have as many offensive opportunities as other clubs, but when they do, he is one of the biggest facilitators that they have. Now, when Odegaard went out, we saw Trossard, Martinelli, and Merino all fill in to varying degrees, and all 3 of those guys had played before. It's not like they were coming off the bench and they were backups, but rarely did they all play together, and you started to see Trossard and Martinelli playing at the same time. You started to see more of a 4-4-2 setup rather than a 4-3-3, and so it did change changed the entire structure of the Arsenal offense, and what was missing was that facilitator, which is exactly where Emile Smith Rowe would have entered. If we look at what Emile Smith Rowe has been doing as a facilitator for Fulham, you'd see the numbers are very similar to what Odegaard was doing. He's played more, obviously, because he's getting a run of games and he's been healthy, but in 796 minutes, he has 41 passes into the final third for 4.64 passes into the final third per 90. That is just slightly better than what Odegaard had done this season, and it's better than what Odegaard has done over the course of his career. And so that would have been a natural fit to just slide him right in. Now, it's not like they just didn't like Emile Smith Rowe and didn't rate him as a player and just cast him off. No, they cashed in on an academy graduate who had come up with, in their system, had gotten a run of games a few years ago, had some injury histories, and just wasn't getting enough playing time, and he did want to go somewhere where he was going to get more playing time. But part of that, outside of the injury history, part of that is a failing on Mikel Arteta's a behalf for not rotating his team enough over the past few years. And that's something I've talked about before. Mikel Arteta does not rotate his starting 11 very often. He has a little bit more depth now, so you've got a 12th or 13th player that rotates in a few positions. We talked about Trossard and Martinelli both playing a fair amount, but not always at the same time. But in general, he does not rotate very often, and that was a pitfall a few years ago when they had a lead in the Premier League and really lost steam down the stretch because he ran the same 11 guys out there every single game. And so there was some time for Emile Smith Rowe. He only missed 10 games last year in the 23-24 season, but after that, he still only got 3 starts in the Premier League and only played 475 minutes the entire season across all competitions. There were definitely minutes there for Emile Smith Rowe to get a little bit of a run, be used as a sub, a few more spot starts somewhere, and that could have enticed him to want to stick around. Teams have to plan for injuries. Injuries are not an excuse, and I've been saying that for years now. With all the competitions that a team like Arsenal is in, they're playing on 4 fronts, European football, guys are going to get hurt. It is an inevitability, and you must have depth. So rather than going and spending these huge sums on stars, you need to be able to, get depth that can come in and play. And Emile Smith Rowe was that. It wasn't like I'm saying they should have gone out and got him. They had him. He was an academy player. And you have to get something out of your academy guys, and you've got to find a way to work them in so that they don't leave. You can't blame Emile Smith Rowe for wanting to leave, and you can't blame Arsenal for selling him and cashing in because they did well on that move. But he is the exact guy they needed to fill in for Martin Odegaard when he got hurt. He would have been the absolute, you couldn't hand pick somebody better, and you had him. So that is a massive failing, and that may end up being the difference in the Premier League this season. It is going to be a ridiculously tight race. They are 9 points back of Liverpool right now, and the difference between 3rd and 14th right now is 4 points. It's absolutely insane what's happening right now in the Premier League, and any additional point dropped could make the difference between, I don't know if they're even going to be in contention to win, but it might be the difference between a European spot or not. And, no, Emile Smith Rowe would not have just plopped in and it's guaranteed those 8 points that they dropped were going to go to them. No, that's not how it works, and there are other factors around, but it certainly would have helped. And I think you can safely say that it would have gotten them at least a couple of those points. Maybe one of the losses turns into a draw. Maybe one of the draws turns into a win when they just couldn't get that late goal because they couldn't set up Havertz. They couldn't set up Saka. They couldn't just get that final pass that they needed. That's what Emile Smith Rowe does. And oh, by the way, he can score a little bit too. So to me, as I'm looking back on this break and now we're getting ready to hit the reset into the season, the lack of depth for Martin Odegaard cost them points. I don't think it cost them all 8 points that they dropped while he was out because they have some other failings too. But it definitely cost them some points, and a few points may be the difference between 1st or 2nd this year, or 4th and 5th, or any of the lines of demarcation that really matter in the Premier League, and the lack of depth really hurt them while Odegaard was out. And they had the perfect depth piece, and they could not get him to stay because they did not play him enough over the past few years. The lack of rotation from Arteta is coming back to bite them, and now they have to watch their academy grad have a great season for Fulham while they flounder with the lack of Martin Odegaard. So he's back now. We'll see if they can get up and running, but what's done is done. Those points are dropped and they can't get them back, and I think the lack of Emile Smith Rowe plays a huge part in why that happened. What do you think? How much of a factor was that? Am I overstating it or am I understating it? Get down in that comment section. Let me know what you think about Martin Odegaard, Emile Smith Rowe, Arsenal, the race, anything. Get down in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts. You can also leave some comments on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. While you're at it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel and check out the website pitchsidepub.com. Thanks as always for joining us here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub.